Tamara and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about why certain types mistype as other types. I wonder why. So why do you think certain types mistype as the wrong type? Like, what's your opinion, and which types do it more than others, and why do you think they do it? For one thing, people often get very attached to the wrong type. It's like before they explore another type, it's kind of a weird thing. It's like people can read one that's kind of close to theirs and get very attached, and they don't want to let go or even think about another type, or they think that the type that they just read is so much more interesting than their own type. Like, this is how I picture myself in my head. Like, this is how I really wish I could be. And since there's a possibility that I am, I'm going to hold on to this because I don't want to be my own type. Because when I read that, it's something about it that maybe isn't as interesting. I've also seen people who are not as familiar with MBTI latch on to a certain type, and it's because they don't know the terminology as well. They don't understand the nuances as well. So in that case, it's very easy to attach to a type that just really isn't theirs. And I remember when I first learned about MBTI, I typed a completely wrong type. I mean, it was so different for me. It was the ESTJ, and I remember reading it and I was like, oh gosh, this is not me. Not that I thought anything bad about it, but I just wasn't resonating with any of it. So I thought that MYERS-BRIGGS was kind of like one of those things that you read in a magazine, like one of those personality tests that, okay, yeah, I got that little tidbit. And, and the paragraph was also like this small that I was reading. But then I had a family member that really got into it, and she helped me to figure out what my type actually was, and I was sold because I couldn't believe that a description could fit me the way that one did. So another reason, there are 16 MYERS-BRIGGS personality types, right? Right. And therefore, all 16 are, for me, completely different. They just are. I think there's a point scale from like 1 to 60, and you can fall anywhere on that continuum. And so it can make it really difficult for some people to decide if they're really extroverted or they're really introverted. And you could be somewhere in the middle. You could be on the far end. You could be on either extremes. You could be a quarter in. So sometimes it makes it difficult to determine extroversion and introversion. But there have been times when, as we all know, if you're really into MBTI, you probably have had some type of heated discussion about it for some reason. For me, I don't really care if you're an introvert or an extrovert. I don't care. I think that they're both important, but I'm not really just looking at that. For me, there is this picture in my head of what each type actually looks like, regardless of that introversion and extroversion thing, because I think sometimes people get hung up on that. I think family influences have a big impact on which letters you develop. For example, I grew up in a very introverted household, so I was the only one in the house that was extroverted. So I have adapted a lot of introverted qualities, because there would be times when everybody would be in a different room doing their own thing, reading the newspaper, watching TV. And so I'm used to having a lot of downtime. In fact, I need it because I grew up with that. Living in an introverted household, you have more room to develop your imagination and your creativity, and usually given a little bit more space. Not all the time, because it depends. The same thing goes for someone who's grown up in a very extroverted family and they were introverted. They may have adapted a lot of extroverted qualities because they were used to people being around all the time. So they feel more extroverted. If you were in a household that was run mostly by introverted parents, you're used to having some quiet time or some reflection time. So all of those influences are super important, at least to me. You also have to remember that only 25% of the population, approximately, is an introvert or are introverts, one of those. So there can be some stigmas attached to introversion. You're too shy, you're too quiet, I'm gonna shake you out of your shell, because the world is very extroverted, at least in the US. So there are some people who have developed a complex about being an introvert. It's like, I'm allergic to it. I don't want to be an introvert. That did not work for me as a kid, and I'm going to show you that I'm extroverted and I want the world to know, and they just don't want to be put in that box. But for me, I'm not looking at your introversion or your extroversion. I'm looking at the picture of what the type actually looks like. And some types, 9 times out of 10, because there's always exceptions, jump out at you. So if you're really familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about. Like ENTPs usually jump out. INFJs, there's usually this energy around them that just, I don't know, it just, I can just literally feel their energy. ENFPs also have this something about them that is just instant. There's really no guessing. They usually give it away. Judgers and perceivers, there can also be some issues. I think there can be a lot of parental influence on that. I know someone who had judgers for parents, so I think he would argue that he's a J. But when I'm looking at that overall personality type, it doesn't fit. It just doesn't. So I understand that maybe he's adopted more J qualities because his parents were going to insist on closure. They were going to insist on things being done in a certain way. But that can be a trip. I also know an ENFP who had very strong J influences, and I think it has maybe created some issues for her because she wasn't allowed to be as free as she wants to be, but at the same time, she can act very J-like when it comes to getting work done, when it comes to order, when it comes to being organized. However, that ENFP thing, it just, you can't deny it. So sometimes we can develop qualities based on our family of origin, and it can confuse things if you look at them in isolation, but I don't look at things in isolation. I look at what that whole, once you get used to MBTI, you can memorize your whole workplace pretty much and know what type everybody is. It's like they're walking around. You just, their types are almost walking around. You can see the letters on their heads. It just, I don't know how to explain it. But if you can relate to what I'm saying, write below in the comment section. Because I'm curious to see if any of you have that same experience where you just feel it. Now, occasionally there will be someone that maybe on that scale, they're really close to that. There are some people that can be ambiguous, but it's usually, I can narrow it down to 2 types like that. Like there's something that's just, you know what I'm saying? And it could be as simple as you usually see that type on a male more often, or you see that type on a woman more often. I mean, it could be that. It could be just, a rarer type, so you don't see it as often. So that's just my little 2 cents on why I think people mistype. But it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. If you can relate to that feeling, let me know. Because I think the joy in Myers-Briggs is really getting your type right so that you can really dig deep into yourself and have this strong, like, wow, okay, so I do this, I do that, and you can grow from it. But I don't know. Some people say that it's possible for you to change Myers-Briggs types. I actually had college professors to say that, and I strongly disagree with that because one letter changes the entire personality, at least for me. So that's not possible. You might go through some trauma and become more withdrawn because of that, but you still are the same personality type that you always have been, unless something happens. But anyway, back to the story. Haven't you ever heard people say, I was more introverted as a kid, but now I'm more extroverted? They probably have developed some aspect of themselves that they hadn't before. You can argue over, it's easy to argue over individual letters, but you kind of have to do both. So you have to kind of look at the individual letters, but you also have to look at the picture of that person, of that type, in order to truly make sense of it. And in isolation, you can make arguments all day long for why something isn't one or the other, and it's easy to do that. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel below. Thanks for watching. Bye.